Welcome to Insights. I'm Dick Goldberg, and our subject today, happiness. How the science of positive psychology can boost our happiness and help us flourish. With us is Dr. Lynn Johnson, the author of Enjoy Life, Healing with Happiness, guess what, based on the science of positive psychology. In addition to this book, he's been a college lecturer and teacher, leads workshops, and Dr. Johnson's traveled through the U.S. and abroad, training therapists in brief therapy using, there's that word again, the positive psychology method. Welcome, Dr. Johnson. Thanks for joining us.
And thank you for having me, Dick. It is a pleasure for me to be here.
Great. So let me ask you this open. By the time we're 21, is our level of happiness pretty much predetermined and set?
Our level of happiness is about 50% predetermined and set. Genetics plays quite a role in that. And unless we intervene, we'll continue to have the same genetic level of happiness that we've always had. You can call that a set point. It's a little bit like a thermostat.
Mm-hmm.
Your temperature might go up a little, it might go down a little, but it's going to be basically right around where your thermostat is set. And that's set by biology.
And let me ask you, if you're 21 and you're not happy, you're not unhappy, you're kind of in the middle, and you win the lottery, will that make you real happy?
That'll make you very, very happy, and you'll continue to be happy for several months. And within about roughly 9 months, not more than a year, generally not between 9 months and a year, guess what? Your happiness level goes back to the original level.
Why is that?
So if you were unhappy before, you now have $20 million or $50 million, but you're back to your original unhappy level.
Why?
Well, because sadly enough, outside things don't make us lastingly happy. They make us temporarily happy. If I give you a sack of candy, you're temporarily happy.
Mm-hmm.
But then it fades and you go back to your original level of happiness.
Well, let me challenge that. If you get $20 million, you can buy yourself a beautiful home. That's going to be there forever.
It will.
So that doesn't go away in 9 months.
No, and you could buy yourself a brand new Jaguar car, and that'll be there for a year or two, and you can buy yourself this and that. You can buy yourself trips to the islands, and yet, what happens is a thing we call habituation. And habituation is the fact that we get used to stuff. Mother Nature plays this practical joke on us that says that outside things we get used to.
This includes things like plastic surgery and getting a beautiful new face?
You know, it totally does. It totally does. The things that we want for ourselves, like plastic surgery or a six-pack stomach or a fancy car, or, like you said, a beautiful multi-million-dollar house. All those things make us happy for a period of time, and within 3 to 6 months, 9 months at about the most, you're drifting back to your original level of happiness.
What about a great spouse? You get married and you get a great spouse.
Well, that's a pretty good thing, yeah, and that does make us pretty happy for quite a while.
Longer than 9 months?
Drift back to our original level, see?
Oh. Well, at this point, why don't you explain to us the science of positive psychology?
Well, what positive psychology sets out to do is ask, what can we do, given our genetic factors, to lastingly raise our happiness level? We know, for example, that very happy people live longer and have better health. They're more generous. They're better to work with. They're better spouses. They are healthier and use fewer medical services. And ironically, happy people earn more money. I mean, instead of money making you happy, happiness makes you money.
Wow. So there's a lot in it to be happy besides being happy.
Yeah.
So the rich get richer in that way.
You want to cultivate your happiness because it's good for the rest of society.
Wow.
See? I mean, it's not really selfish to try to be happier. It's actually one of the best positive social things you can do.
So happy people are kinder to others?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. A happy person will volunteer to help you move on a bitterly cold day. The unhappy person says, oh, I wish I could help, Dick, but it's too cold and I don't want to go out today. It really bothers them.
Well, I might be getting ahead of ourselves here, but is it possible that the kind person is happy because they're kind?
Isn't that a nice loop there? You've hit the nail right on the head. The kind person is happier and the happy person is kinder. And so those two feed off of each other. A couple of positive psychology professors have done an experiment, Dick, that might interest you. Most college students think that happiness comes from pleasure and excitement, enjoyment, so they give the college class an assignment. Go out and do as many pleasurable and exciting things as you can this week. And they do, and they have them rate their happiness. And then the next week, they've organized these people into teams that go to, say, a hospital and read to sick children, or they go to a poor neighborhood and fix up some widow's house for her. They do some acts of kindness. And actually, to the surprise of the college students, the week where they do the kind acts, they're far happier than the weeks where they do the pleasurable, exciting acts.
How do they know that?
They test them with objective rating scales of happiness.
So these kids getting drunk and going to a Saturday football game for their college team think they're happy, but they're not?
They think they're happy, and it's not a very significant level of happiness. It's not very convincing. On the other hand, if they took the same money they spend on the beer and they used it to, say, fix up the porch of some poor lady, some poor single mother whose porch is falling apart. And they go in, they fix up the porch, and they paint the house, and they work around that house. At the end of that day, they're far happier than if they went to the game and their team won.
Wow. That's a hard sell.
Oh, I know. It's like, I'm sorry to tell you this, like bad news, right?
Yeah.
Bad news for the car industry, bad news for the beer industry, bad news for all these things that tell us, oh, you'll be happy if you have me in your life. And the answer is no, not necessarily.
But you will be for a short period of time.
Yep, you will be for a short period of time.
So when we buy candy or an ice cream cone, that makes us happy at that moment.
At that moment.
Well, do people think that far ahead? I mean, what's the draw? What's going to make you happy in 2 years, or what's going to make you happy today?
Well, the good news is most of the little activities that I suggest to people you can do and be happier today.
Oh.
Such as the kind act. Whenever I've done something kind for someone, I feel happier immediately. There's an assignment I probably should mention at this point, because people might be saying, well, come on, Johnson, show us what we can do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's one. Suppose I keep a gratitude diary, Dick, and I write down 3 or 4 or 5 things in the last 24 hours that I feel good about, I'm pleased about. I'd like to have that continue to happen in my life. The very act of writing that down raises my happiness very nicely.
Immediately.
Yeah, immediately. So it's not something that you have to... Now, on the other hand, if I wanted to lose weight, if I start running every day for 30 minutes and, eating well, then in 2 weeks I've lost 2 or 3 pounds, and in a month maybe I've lost 4 pounds, and goody. Well, that's a long way in advance. But with the good news with the happiness is it doesn't take a month or 6 weeks or 2 months. It's most of these things we can do right away.
There's a little segue, but I've heard recently there's some studies that show people who can postpone gratification, who can discipline themselves, tend to be happier than people who aren't good at self-discipline.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, it's interesting. It's the people who pass up the party at college, saying, "Oh man, I'd love to go to the party, but hey, I've got a big final on Monday, so I'm going to spend the weekend studying." Those folks actually are happier. And I'll tell you an interesting study that they did once with high school students. They found 2 opposite groups of kids. They found kids with lots of freedom, lots of free time, and they found a group of kids with no free time. The no free time kids were really busy because they were involved in lots of stuff. It was things like music lessons or sports, tutoring younger kids, being in clubs. And so these high achieving kids were very disciplined young people, and they were working hard and practicing their music an hour a day or tutoring some younger kid an hour a day and things like that. And then the other group were, we get to go to the mall anytime we want, we get to hang out and listen to music anytime we want, we get to do this and this and this. Now, the guy doing this, Mike Csikszentmihalyi, asked them both, okay, who's going to be the happier group? And everybody agreed, it's probably the kids that get to go to the mall and hang out anytime they want. That would make sense to the college mind or the high school mind, right?
Right.
But then when Csikszentmihalyi had them keep little diaries of their thoughts, and he would beep them on a beeper randomly, and they would pull out their diary and fill out this diary as to how they were feeling right at that moment. The most common emotion for the kids with all this freedom, the most common emotion, Dick, was boredom. Mm-hmm. They were bored.
Wow. Whereas
the kids that were busy, they were doing their athletic training and their music practice and their tutoring, and they actually felt very excited about their lives and felt good much more of the time. It's like, here's the thing. Your life doesn't belong to you.
What do you mean?
Your life belongs to the community in which you live.
You want to fill us in there?
Well, here's an example. Why do we have, when somebody gets married, what do we generally do? We have a big party, don't we? Mm-hmm. We have a big gathering, and people get together, and they're witnessing this union. Now, at a deeper level, what that means is your life and your partner's life, those lives don't belong to you. They belong to the community. We're all part of a greater whole. Now, when you're working hard, you're giving yourself to the community. You're doing things for the benefit of the community. But when you're hanging out at the mall or sitting around and smoking marijuana and listening to music, you're doing nothing for the community. You're doing strictly for yourself. And I think that Mother Nature has ordained that when we do that, we are not happy.
Well, how do you know it's not just because you're not busy, you're bored, but if you're doing these other things for the community, you're doing something?
Well, and that's true too. That's true too. If we can stay busy, we're happier. If we sacrifice momentary pleasure for longer-term pleasure, we're actually quite a bit happier.
Mm-hmm. What's examples of that postponement? I can think of one, playing an instrument, right?
Yeah, playing an instrument is a great example of that. Most sports are a wonderful example of that. For every hour that you're on the field, in the glory of the game, you spend dozens and dozens of hours practicing and practicing and practicing.
Mm-hmm. And is the practicing an unhappy experience in order to have a peak experience later?
The practicing typically is a somewhat painful experience. It's kind of strange, but whenever I am learning something new, the same circuits in my brain are triggered as if I'm actually experiencing physical pain. So you could say that learning something new hurts. Like, my wife and I went to Italy this fall, and I studied the Italian language, got Italian language courses and practiced them so I could, and it was helpful. It was kind of fun being able to pick up little snatches of conversation and have some general idea of what people were talking about. Now, while I'm learning that, Dick, how does my brain feel? It feels like it's in some pain.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I get to Italy and we're bicycling around Tuscany and having a wonderful time, and then it's a very pleasurable thing to listen to people talking Italian and being able to pick up a fair number of words and get the gist of the conversation. Well,
let me hypothesize, Lynn, that would also have something to do with your self-esteem. and the joy from feeling better about yourself.
Yeah, now that's an interesting point. Years ago in California, there was a push to raise kids' self-esteem by telling them they were great.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually turned out to be a kind of a disastrous idea.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't work out at all well. On the other hand, self-esteem should be seen of as a byproduct of
Mm-hmm.
grit, determination, and self-discipline. That make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So a little torture goes a long way to feeling good about yourself.
There's actually a brand new study out on that, Dick, that suggests that a moderate amount of pain and difficulty and even failure in life as children are growing up actually makes them much stronger, more resilient, and happier than if kids grow up never having faced failure. Now,
Wow.
you know, look, when my youngest son was in elementary school, he was one of the fastest runners in the school. So every year they would have a 5K, and so I got him out and trained him a little bit, and I said, look, you can do this. You could win the whole thing. I got over there, and they were letting the kids go at random times and not timing, and I was just furious about it. And in fact, I kind of chewed out the principle, and the idea was we don't want anyone to feel like a failure. And I say, no, actually, you do want people to feel like failures because it's part of growth. It's part of what helps us to grow.
So I'm hearing avoid instant gratification and postpone it, and be disciplined, be kind, learn to have gratitude for the good things in your life.
Oh, beautiful. You're very bright. You're picking up on that very nicely, and that's exactly what we're saying.
And what would you like to add to that list? What's a fourth?
One of them would be have hope for the future.
Oh.
Have hope for the future.
Tell me more.
Generally speaking, mostly in presidential races, the more hopeful candidate wins. There's this famous example of Ronald Reagan debating Jimmy Carter. And, of course, Carter is actually a great guy, you know, the Habitat for Humanity and things like that. I mean, he's done some wonderful things. But he came across as kind of pessimistic and discouraging, and, of course, Reagan's great gift was to come across as hopeful. Well, it was kind of neck and neck, and then Carter was sort of complaining about the future, worrying about the future, you know, oh, we've got these problems and we're going to have to deal with, and of course Mr. Reagan won't deal with them. And Ronald Reagan did that famous little quote, Bill. He said, well, there you go again.
That's very good.
And at that moment, everyone rated Reagan as winning the debate.
Wow. Is this related to optimism?
And so let's practice optimism. Let's look at the future with a positive expectation. Right now, our country is in trouble, and part of the problem in our country is people are not optimistic. If you look at surveys, people don't think their children are going to do better than they've done, and that is a change for the American society. Traditionally, Americans assume and believe and think that their kids will outdo them.
So how does this relate to our day-to-day lives in terms of individually being happier and optimism?
That's right. Yeah. When you go out during your and face your daily life, if you can go out with a kind eye looking for some good thing you can do, you'll be happier. If you go out with hope that today can be a better day than yesterday, you will be happier. If you go out looking for something you could get involved in that takes you beyond yourself, you're more than just yourself. You are part of a community, and you know, there's this takes a community. It takes a village to raise a child. Well, in ideal circumstances, children that grow up in small villages are very, very optimistic and happy, compared to kids that grow up in a big city where they are exposed to people all the time that they don't know.
Okay, let's say you just had a talk with your boss, and he said, Lynn, you're not doing so well. We're not going to raise your pay. As a matter of fact, we're going to drop it 5%. I hope you do better. Now, how does optimism help you here?
What I would be curious about is what will be the first sign that you will see in me that tells you that I am doing better?
Oh, to the boss?
Yeah, to the boss.
But I'm asking internally, how can you be optimistic after that bad
Well,
news?
how internally I'll be optimistic is to talk to the boss about what are the signs I'm doing better.
Oh, I see.
See, I'm not interested in why I did poorly. I'm interested in what I can do that does better.
Mm-hmm.
I might say, okay, pick out the 3 things that I did this year that you did like, and if I did more of that, I'd be a success.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's an optimistic view. In other words, there's actually some evidence for this, that optimistic people kind of ignore bad news, you know.
Uh-huh.
They just did a study where they looked at the brain scans of optimistic people, and they find when they manipulate the experiment so that people are getting bad news,
Mm-hmm.
the optimistic people, they just sort of, their brains somewhat turn off,
Hmm.
you know, and they just say, I don't want to listen to that. I don't want to think about that. Tell me when I'm doing well, and I'll do more of that.
Well, can you operationally define for us an optimist? What's an optimist?
Okay, an optimist feels like good things are going to happen. They're going to probably stick around for quite a while. In other words, there's this will last. A good thing is going to happen. It's going to last. It'll be because of what I did, and it'll be great. It'll spread and influence all parts of my life. Now, the pessimist thinks, oh, the good things don't last, and I don't make them happen, and they won't spread. But the bad things, I make them happen. I'm responsible for them, and it's all my fault if I don't do better. So they're focused. The pessimists are focused on what goes wrong. The optimist is focused on how things can go right.
You know, it seems to overlap with gratitude.
Now, that's not a completely off the wall remark. In fact, that's actually very insightful. Someone that practices gratitude is going to also look at the future with more hope, because after all, here are several things that happened today that I feel good about, and it's very likely that more good things will happen tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very nice.
Do you do this, by the way, every day? Do you have a gratitude journal?
Yes, I keep track of what I'm grateful for. The secret is I'm not a naturally happy person. I have to work at it all the time. My biological set point of happiness is actually low, and unless I do the same things I encourage other people to do, I get feeling kind of downhearted and discouraged and not very optimistic about the future.
Well, if you're willing to reveal this, what is your discipline here? What do you do to keep yourself up?
There's 2 or 3 things. We haven't even mentioned this, but we're probably coming up towards the end of our interview, so I'll...
You got 7 minutes.
I've got, oh, good. That's a whole lifetime. Number 1, I try to stay active every day, physically active. I do more stuff. There's something physiological that when I have a good workout every day, I feel better generally.
Mm-hmm.
I try to thank people and acknowledge what they do right. I try to be more generous. I was not raised that way, wasn't part of my culture, but I've made it a habit of trying to be thankful, smile at people more.
Does it make you happier, if I may, to compliment other people, to stroke them?
It's a type of social connection. If I can make another person smile, say a waiter at a restaurant, if I can make him smile at me, I've done something well. Things like that. People that I randomly meet.
Mm-hmm.
That's a kind act. It's socially helpful. We all live in the same world, and the more smiling we can create, the better off we are.
This is a little far out, but is doing an act of kindness a way of being kind to yourself?
Yeah, okay, now, see, isn't that interesting? We are wired in such a way that we do feel a lot of pleasure when we do something of a kind act. I was mountain biking one day, came across a guy with a flat tire. I said, hey, do you need a patch kit? He said, nah, the tube split, so I've got to walk this back, and it was about 4 or 5 miles back to the car. And I just reached in my backpack, pulled out a spare tube, and tossed it to him. His face lights up, right?
Right.
He says, oh, man, give me your phone number. I'll pay you back for this. Oh, forget it. I buy these things on sale, $3 or $4 a piece. It's nothing. I said, carry a spare and give it to somebody who needs it. You'll pay me back. Now, that made his day, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But it also made mine. I felt great. In fact, I felt better about that than the great adventure I was having on my mountain bike trip.
Wow. We're back to your day, Lynn. So you're working out, you have your gratitude journal, you're kind. What else do you do?
The other things I try to do is set a goal and be working towards it. I'm working on a new book now, and when I do something that leads me towards a goal that I think is worthwhile and important, a book that it's not for my glory or benefit that I write the book. It's because I think it'll help other people. I think it's something that I can do.
So it's important not to be aimless and just going from pleasure to pleasure and doing a mindless job. It's important to have some goals and purpose, right?
On my website, drlynnjohnson.com, I've got a blog going there. And so if you go there and you read the blog and you like it, then I have done something of value there. I've lifted you or I've energized you in some way. So that makes my writing the blog on Dr. Lynn Johnson a better thing to do.
A couple things I'm wondering about. Spirituality, religion, how does that fit?
Well, mostly religion is actually quite helpful. Spirituality is definitely helpful. People can be atheists and actually score high on a spirituality measure because they feel like they're part of a larger whole, and their lives kind of belong to the community, and they're part of the community. Spirituality is very helpful, but then again, just it turns out that simply going to church and attending church with people that are of like mind is actually quite energizing for us and quite positive and quite helpful.
Is that mainly social?
Well, we don't think so. When you do studies on people that attend religious services, temple, church, versus people that attend, say, Rotary Club or Lions Club, you do not get the same boost from the people that are attending social clubs that you get from the people that are attending spiritual services.
So people who are religious or belong to a religion are happier.
There's something about belonging to a congregation of religious people. It seems to do us more good. Now, the Rotary Club does a great deal of good. Right now they're trying to wipe out polio in the world. That's a wonderful thing to do, And they're always doing good things, and that should raise our happiness, and it probably does, but not as much as being a member of a religious congregation, a spiritual congregation.
I'm wondering to move a little away from this to happiness in different countries. Is the U.S. a happy country?
U.S. is a fairly happy country. We're among one of the top countries. We're not the happiest country in the world. Right now, oddly enough, the happiest country is Denmark. It's kind of a strange thing because Denmark also has a fairly high suicide rate. There's a few things about Denmark that seems to make people a little happier. One is it's kind of hard to utterly fail in Denmark. I mean, they have a safety net, and you can't fall very far. So there's a lot of what you might call equality of opportunity, and there are social programs that help even things out. But frankly, another thing is that Denmark has been traditionally a fairly homogeneous country. Everybody basically, they've all been Danes. And part of the unfair advantage they have is in America we have a lot of diversity in our country.
And more income inequality as well.
Different income groups, different ethnic groups, all kinds of differences. And that's kind of helpful for creativity, and it's kind of hurtful for happiness.
That's
We're
interesting.
a somewhat more creative country because we're so diverse.
Well, in our last closing minute, Doctor, could you sum up the most important steps people could take if they wanted to improve their happiness?
I think that making a habit of looking forward in a hopeful way, staying physically active, setting goals, and cultivating a very grateful feeling. This is a marvelous world we live in. It's almost magical in terms of how absolutely fabulous it is to be alive and alert. The Buddhists tell us that being born a human being is a rare and precious thing, and I like that attitude.
Well, with that, I am grateful for your sharing your wisdom with us, Doctor, and I hope that the listeners will join us on the next edition of Insights.